Here's two guys that survived riding a DeLorean filled with Coca-Cola products, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 29 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan.
In today's episode, we're joined by a sheepdog and his tactical parakeet alert system. You are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. We're joined today by John Smith, author of The Wolf and The Sheepdog, a collection of short stories. Thank you for joining us today, John.
Thank you for having me.
So, tell us about it. Who are you, John?
I'm a serving police officer, so I'm not retired. I'm still employed by my agency. I have 12 years of policing experience, so almost at the halfway mark. Get to retire after 25.
Very nice.
I've done 9 years on the street. And I've just recently been promoted to firearms training instructor for our department.
Oh, very cool. Your book, The Wolf and the Sheepdog, lists a series of stories from a specific time period. What is that time period cover within your experience as a police officer?
Well, each short story is based off of my experience, and generally would have to be working on the first 6 years of me working in the street. So the book starts with me describing what it's like to be a new recruit, and basically going from civilian world to what we call the policing or the sheepdog world, and the different transitions that occur as you move in that career.
In the book's dedication, two things stood out. Let's start with the easier of the two, and we'll come back a little later for the second one. You talk about your troubled youth. You thank your family for putting up with you through your troubled youth. What kind of trouble were you getting yourself into?
You know what? It's an old adage, right? You can't fly like an eagle if you hang out with turkeys, right? When I was young, from that 14 to 17 years of age, I didn't hang out with the best crowd, so my behavior wasn't the best at all. Like, I dropped out of school, got involved in the alcohol drug scene, and basically life was kind of rolling to a nowhere place at that time.
So, John, I hear a lot whenever I talk to law enforcement, the whole idea of the troubled youth, or, everybody says your troubled youth, you either end up in crime or as a cop. So what insight do you have into what mindset leads that to happen?
For me specifically, it was a wake up. It was almost an overnight transition where I looked at myself in the mirror and just did not like what I was seeing at that point. I mean, it's fun to go and party and have a good time and that, but for me, I had my epiphany moment where it was like, well, I got to really start putting in some hard work to fix where I'm at right now. And I think a lot of good cops had sort of a colorful background to them. And I think what makes them good cops is because they can realize, well, I was there and I kind of know where this person's coming from, so let me see if I can communicate the right way with this person. Whereas if you have no life experience outside of your house and then you're going to throw that uniform on, that's generally where you see the officers have way more problems just because they have no life experience. And, as an example, if I go to a call and I've never been in a relationship and I don't know what it's like to go through the domestic issues in a relationship, and I show up at a call and I try to fix somebody else's problem with no experience on my side, I just can't do it, right? So to have the colorful past as an officer, I think it really helps that person being a really good street cop.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. I noticed that you donate proceeds from your art to a troubled youth camp. Is that something you're pretty active in?
Yeah, it's tough on shift work. I mean, anyone who knows anything about shift work, to be active in the community is hard because a lot of times we work weekends and nights. So that's the way I was getting involved with this youth camp, is by donating proceeds from the sale of some of my artwork to the youth camp. It's a good youth camp because it gets the kids outside of the city and then gets them involved in more hands-on stuff like horseback riding, fishing, everything like that. So I think it kind of helps them form a different identity than the kid on the corner that's smoking dope breaking into cars.
Tell us, we touched on it a few minutes ago, but let's really dive into what is The Wolf and the Sheepdog. What is the book about?
Well, each short story is a call, and the wolf is sort of the opposite end of standard Hollywood. There's no Hollywood calls in there. There's no big shootouts. There's no high-speed chases. There's nothing like that. What I do is I really describe the other side of policing, what it's like to go through that type of stress, the smells, the sights and sounds that are involved in what we consider normal calls, as well as how does one do that job and still integrate into the real world. Because the job we do, we deal with 10% of the population 90% of the time. So it's not a real world that we police. And so after doing your job all day dealing with bad guys, how do you transition to be normal and come home and still be healthy on that end?
I would imagine that's a very problematic emotional aspect for most sheepdogs, regardless of what kind of sheepdog they are, whether it's fire, rescue, police officers, all of that. How do you decompress when you get home?
Well, I'm really lucky. My wife and I, we have a good communication. It allows me to tell her what I saw, what happened to me during the day, and she understands that. And then on top of it, it's all the traditional stuff. Being physically active, that helps a lot. I paint, that helps a lot. And as odd as it sounds, majority of the people that I have friendships with aren't cops. That's what keeps me healthy.
So, John, the journey that you're on here, I mean, it's an interesting one, and the true stories, the reality behind it. Can you give us some more detail as to how it impacts you on a day-to-day basis? I mean, so you talked about, you've got your wife to talk to, but is there something behind that? Does it bring you down? Does it get you more revved up to do it? I mean, which end of the spectrum do you end up on?
You know what? It's a real roller coaster ride, actually, because when we're at work and we put a uniform on, we enter a state of what's called hypervigilance. So a really good way to describe it is when you walk into a dark parking lot and, the lighting's bad and you get that sort of spidey sense, as people want to call it, that something might go wrong. That is really the state that we go into as soon as we put a uniform on. So we hit this hypervigilance state, which there's a constant trickle of adrenaline because we're looking for everything. And then when you take the uniform off, it's sort of the downside to the chemical fix. And we go to the low end of our roller coaster ride, and that's where most of the problems come from, is that downswing to the hypervigilant state. And so yeah, while you're at work, you're high as a kite. You're working with a great group of people. Sometimes that addiction to adrenaline gets us in trouble because we will take a little bit more of a risk at a call to allow us more of that adrenaline. It's a really odd cycle to go through, where after the call you think about it and go, wow, the best tactic for me would have been to wait for more backup to deal with this guy. But instead you take a little bit more of a risky situation because you're always, you know what, I guess it's like a heroin junkie. You're always still trying to get to that higher level of adrenaline after a while. And then you come home and you have to deal with, the real world, which is, compared to policing or fire or EMS, I can imagine, is pretty slow. And that's a lot of times that's our problem.
When did it strike you to write the book?
I had really no intention to write a book when I first started, actually. I'm an avid reader, and then I read a few great books like Jarhead and The Last True Story I'll Ever Tell. And I was like, well, I'll try this. And I started writing, and it immediately became a huge decompression. It was odd in a way. I didn't realize how much I had bottled up until I started to write about it. And then when I was done writing it, everything that I had stored away was gone.
So in talking before the show a little bit, you mentioned that you found us actually through searching for prep and those types of topics online, which, by the way, we mentioned also we're thrilled about. But can you tell us a little bit, and I think we get it, I want to make sure the listeners really understand that being that sheepdog, that transition from cop and prepper and how it all works together and what makes you interested in the prepping community as well.
Yeah, it's you know what? It's a huge reality check when you see what we see. I mean, I get to see people at their finest moments, and vice versa. I get to see people at their worst moments. And if you rely on other people to ensure your safety and your comfort, it's a real false sense of security. You know, as an example, I do my job and deal with what I deal with so that that soccer mom can think it's a safe, fuzzy place to live in. And that is a real false sense of reality, because it's not a safe, fuzzy place to live in. There's a lot of people out there that just have a very predatory mindset, and all they're doing is walking down the street looking for their next victim. And then if you put that into a different context and say, okay, now law enforcement and civil service is stretched because of any situation, whether it be financial, weather-related, or disaster-related, these systems are stretched out. That predatory person has huge opportunity to make victims out of a lot of people.
On that topic, what would you like readers to take away from your book?
Just a new insight. The average person has a outlook on our job, or a stereotype of what our job is like, and it's done through television, and it's a really poor description of what we do. So I talk about, you know, what's the emotion behind the job that we do. And if someone could just read it and just simply be a little bit more relaxed, or understand that when they're watching TV and they get a 10-second clip of police officer squishing somebody, that besides that 10 seconds, there's probably 3 or 4 minutes of actual footage. Because the media has a hard time portraying officers in a good light, because that really doesn't sell newspapers. You know, people don't want to watch the news and see how good of a job a fireman did, or a paramedic, or how great of a job a police officer did. They'd rather see the perception of a really bad situation. So if someone reads it, they'll get the idea of the emotional side, what we deal with, without the effects of Hollywood, and would allow them the understanding of what the job is like. And especially for somebody that wants to get into this job, I talk about the politics that are involved, talk about the transition that happens from recruit to officer. And, you know, it's a real raw look at what policing's like.
Yeah, in the introduction, you make the statement, as you read along through my stories, you may think that I police the public in a way that you don't approve of. I really don't care. I police to protect. What did you mean by that?
Like I was saying before, a lot of people get a very short snippet of an entire interaction with an offender. And the way I police the neighborhoods that they dispatch me to is I police it like I live there. And if I wouldn't tolerate it in my backyard, I'm definitely not going to tolerate it in the backyard that I'm policing at. So, you know, if someone drives by and sees me dealing with a crackhead on the corner, instantly they might be thinking, oh, well, that police officer, he's targeting the poor homeless guy. Whereas they have no idea that I've dealt with this poor homeless fellow for months, and I know he has a criminal record. I know he has the ability to be violent, and I know he's got a huge chemical dependency issue. So if they drive by and they look at me and don't like the fact that I'm dealing with this fellow, I don't take it personally. And that's what I meant by I don't care. It's nothing that I'm going to take personally. If they look at me and say, oh, well, he's just going after the homeless guy in the corner. For me, it's like, no, this is my neighborhood also, and I know what this guy's up to, so I'm going to make life difficult on him, so he leaves this area.
In the Amazon editorial review, it said a part about his dreams have changed, the reality of drug-fueled crime, victims forever scarred, the odor of death have forever changed his dreams. Dreams now border on nightmare as the author works his way through a dark valley that is rarely graced by the warming touch of light. Was this as far as dreams go, was this literal or figurative for you?
You know what? This would be more of the figurative aspect. When I first joined the police department, I think I was like every new recruit and shiny out of the box, where I was like, I'm really going to make a difference here. And then you get out there and you realize, like, wow, the amount of crime, especially the crime that's from the drug scene, because that's been majority of my clientele base has been chemically addicted. You realize that you really can't make an impact. You can't stop that from coming in, simply because as a street officer, you're the low rung on a huge system. And in Canada, the system is really, really soft. Whereas other parts in the United States, multiple offenses, you go to jail. In Canada, multiple offenses, you may, well, as an example, if you get in a fight with a police officer in Canada, the average punishment for standard assault PO is 1 day in jail.
Oh, wow.
So,
wow, that's nothing.
Yeah, so it's a different reality check when you get out there. But it goes back to we deal with that small 10% of the bad guys 90% of the time. And that was one of my adjustments, was to realize that, me being the good guy, I can't really make a change in that, because it's an area that's just way too big for me, right? Like, out of all my clients, I only know of 2 that have stopped taking crack cocaine. So out of 9 years of policing, dealing with hundreds of these people, only 2 of them have stopped using crack cocaine. The rest of them are either still using or they're dead.
Actually, John, I was just about to ask you about that, and thinking in terms of, there's a lot of negative. There's a lot of bad stuff going on out there that your job is really to protect the public from. And I wanted to hear a little bit of the other side of that story. And I guess even 2 out of hundreds, while it doesn't sound like a great statistic, it's 2. There's 2 people that you were able to interact with and potentially help turn in the right direction. How much of the job do you do because of that?
You know what? That's the most rewarding thing. I even write a chapter in my book about it, where it's been a long shift. Really dealt with some hard garbage type of calls. And, it's 6 a.m. I'm driving home to go to sleep. And as I'm driving home, I look over in the park and I see a father and a little child playing in the park. And I guess that was my wake-up call on my perception of the world, because at that moment I realized, hey, you know what? I dealt with all this so that father can go play in the park with his child and live in that personal bubble. And even if you start to look at your world in a different light, then dealing with all the bad stuff doesn't affect you as much. And the same thing for these 2 people. One of them I still run into on a regular basis. And it's really great to see him. Great to see the fact he's cleaned up. He's involved in his kid's life and basically not making all the mistakes he was before. And, not many people can say that, right? Out of their lifetime, I helped 2 people rebuild their world, right? And, fine, I see hundreds of others, but that is their decision to be there. I mean, that's their karma, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a pretty powerful statement. Not many of us can say we've really changed someone else's life, especially in such a drastic way as you're talking about here. And I think that leads us into, you go into a little bit, or you pose the question kind of, and you give some answers, but it's kind of open-ended in why you do what you do. Can you tell us a little bit about, from the mind of a sheepdog, why do you do what you do?
It's going to sound like a cheesy answer, but I totally believe in the fact that this is what fate wanted me to do. I look at paramedics and I look at firefighters and I'm like, wow, like, why? How can you do your job? You're stitching somebody up, you're running into a burning house. Military, I look at them and I'm like, wow, you're willing to go to another place to ensure that people across the ocean are safe. I'm sure if you ask all of them why they love to do what they do, is because that's just what they're made to do. I can't see myself doing anything else. It's a real double-edged sword. It's a job where you see a lot of horrific things, but on the same token, it is the best job in the world. At no point would I want to switch what I'm doing.
Just the other side of where you asked those questions, you had a quote that I thoroughly enjoyed and I wanted to share with the audience, which was, "Character cannot be developed in ease and quiet. Only through experiences of trial and suffering can the soul be strengthened, vision cleared, ambition inspired, and success achieved. You gain strength, experience, and confidence by every experience where you look fear in the face. You must do the thing you cannot do. The finest steel is forged in the hottest furnace." And it was by a unknown author. There are entire books dedicated to quotes. Why is this in particular quote, why did it speak to you so much?
Because for me, that was one of my biggest lessons that I learned, is that if you do not go through that hardship, you really have no idea what you're capable of. As a recruit, your first traffic stop is really stressful, right? The first time you go and stop somebody for speeding or whatever, it's a really stressful environment. But as soon as you finish that one, the next time that it happens, it's really not that bad. And then after a while, it becomes easy to do. And I think that's where a lot of people that sit in this sort of lap of luxury forget how rewarding it can be to truly challenge yourself. And whether you succeed or fail, you tried it, you did it, and then you can move on, right? It's it would be like going through the world and never stubbing your toe. And the first time you stub your toe, it's horrible. But if you stub your toe a lot, it's not that bad of an experience. And a lot of people in this world forget the fact that that challenge is I think is the driving factor behind people. And as soon as they stop challenging themselves, that's where they lose that ambition in life to move.
What in particular would you say preppers and survivalists could take away from the book?
There's several aspects. As I discussed, how bad human behavior can be. One of my officer coaches once said, imagine the worst thing you could do to a human being, and it's been done 10 times worse than that. And then you start working the street and you realize, like, absolutely, like the worst thing I could think about doing to another human, it's been done, and it's been done way more extreme to that. So, I talked about the predatory behavior of other people. And the other thing is I talk a lot about stress. What is post-traumatic stress? And really that's a normal reaction to a really abnormal situation, and how to deal with that post-traumatic stress so it doesn't become a disorder. And then I do talk a lot about the effects of adrenaline, because that was a huge wake-up call to me to experience that time distortion, to find out that you can lose your hearing when you get really big adrenaline dump, tunnel vision, distracting thoughts. In the middle of a huge fight, you'll hear your wife's voice reminding you that you need to pick up milk. It's, those are all things that if you don't know that they can happen, when they do, it slows you down in your reaction quite a bit. So those, I think, would be the biggest ones, even for preppers and survivalists. If they don't really want to read the book because it's about the law enforcement world, it's a great book to read about, to find out the effects of stress and adrenaline, and especially what other people can behave like.
I love it in terms of I think we all need to be a little bit better at being sheepdogs, and less sheep, more sheepdogs is probably a good way to go. But, in the prepping community, I think that's a pretty standard cry for action, or call for action, more sheepdogs. I don't think a lot of people know how to do it. They don't know where to start with that process. And you mentioned the hypervigilance when you put the uniform on. How does somebody start building that up for themselves, understanding their environment, looking around, seeing what's around them, and understanding it to the point where they can then be better sheepdogs, protecting themselves, their families, their neighbors? What's your take on that?
I put a lot of thought into it, and of course I look back into history, and I was thinking about, wow, there used to be Western towns where there'd be, let's say, 2,000 people, and for 2,000 people they only had one sheriff, and that sheriff wasn't there to regulate the behavior of bad guys. He was there to make sure that the bad guys were punished properly, because in that smaller community environment, everyone there was a sheepdog, and they all had basically the same moral compass, and they knew what was right and what was wrong. And at no point, if someone was doing something wrong, did everybody turn away and say, "Not my problem." And that's where it is coming nowadays in society, because we have specialized groups of people like a police officers, where people see an offense occurring, and the first thing they say, "Well, it's not my problem." And I think that's where people's attitudes have to change, is because if that offender gets away, one day it could be your problem. And you don't want everyone else around you just to turn their backs and say, "Well, it's not my problem. That's the police's problem. The police will deal with it." And it's a really fine line because of the legalities behind it. People are always worried, well, will I get into legal trouble? Am I legally okay to do this? And the way I look at it is just function in good faith. If you're doing this because it's a good thing to do, generally the law, you're covered on that. If you're doing this, if you're doing this because you have an ego, or this guy's road raging, and now you're going to step out and get in a fist fight with him, well, that's not in good faith. But if there's a woman on the corner that's getting mugged, well, that's good faith for that, is you're going to help her out, right? And it frustrates me a lot to see footage on the news of an offender on a bus, and then there's an entire bus load of people, and he's being an idiot, and he's robbing an elderly person on the bus, and all you do is you see the sheep in the world just stare at their feet, right? Because they're like, "Not my problem." So the biggest thing is just keep your head up, pay attention, study what normal human behavior is, and we have a great set of instincts, and don't ignore them, because so many victims I deal with that say, "Oh, you know what? I knew something bad was going to happen, but I still walked down the dark alley." Whereas
that happens all the time.
Your instincts were telling you don't go down the alley, then don't go down the alley. Just take that extra 10-minute loop around, and you have no idea what you avoided, right? Because our human instincts are amazing tools, and the majority of the people shut them off, slow them down by throwing their cell phone up by their ear, popping their iPod on, and walking down the street with totally setting off what Mother Nature gave us as gifts.
Oh, that just drives me nuts when I see people doing that, or also specifically when I see my girlfriend getting out of the car, coming into the house, and she has her cell phone in her ear. Not to pick on her, and I just look at her, you have no idea what's going on around you. Was that conversation that important that you needed to be not paying attention from one of the potentially most dangerous times in your day, when you're going from your car to your home? I mean, when you're most vulnerable and probably most likely to be attacked. And then the other day I watched a guy was pulling out of a driveway into traffic, and he was looking to his right at oncoming traffic, and a guy just comes walking right up, and it's very obvious, if he had been paying attention, that the driver was not looking to his left and had no reason to really look to his left. I mean, both of them were a bit at fault. And then the first guy walking on the sidewalk got mad that the guy in the car almost ran him over. And I'm looking at both of them like, y'all are idiots. Neither one of y'all are paying attention to what's going on. And then even going back to what you were talking about, people ignoring their gut instincts, I think that was... Jonathan and I once were on a road trip with another friend to New Mexico, and on the way we listened to the audio version of The Gift of Fear. And I think for the three of us, we've always had a bit of a sheepdog mentality. So for us, it was kind of like, why did somebody need to write a whole book about this? I mean, that's just, who doesn't know to do that? Who doesn't know to listen to their senses? But most people really don't.
Yeah, and it's funny. I have a lot of civilian friends that are preppers. And, I had one of them look at me and say, "Well, you know what, he feels like he missed his mark in life because he didn't go into law enforcement or military. That's the only thing." He looks back saying, "Gee, I wish I would have done that." And he's like, because I'd like to be a sheepdog. And I think a lot of guys who wear a uniform get really hung up on that. My definition of a sheepdog is someone who has a good moral compass that's willing to react to what's right or wrong. Doesn't matter if you wear a uniform or not. I've met, if you want to put it one way, civilian sheepdogs where, you know, you go to a call and someone stepped up to the plate and gone so far above what a normal person would do. And the only reason why is because it was the right thing to do. And, you know, with the majority of the preppers and that I know, same thing. You'd describe to them and say, well, you know, you have to listen to your instincts. And they look at you funny, like, well, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I think as a prepper, you're listening to your instinct to naturally want to have a safety net, you know, to go above and beyond and not rely on somebody else for your safety. And so I think the majority of the preppers out there, they're sheepdogs also, right? Even if you look at it from a very close-knit group, they're a sheepdog to their family because they're at the point where, like, well, no, I need to be independent of this system that's pretty fragile to keep my family safe. Right. So, yeah, I was smiling when you're talking about, this seems like common sense to pay attention to your surroundings. But once again, you know, there's nothing common about common sense, right?
That is funny that you brought that up, because that is something, and I've even been considering writing an article about it, is there's no such, you know, common sense is not common. If it was, it wouldn't be so common that we talk about it. And it is pretty amazing. People love to talk about common sense, but it really just, it's not common.
No, not at all.
People have kind of removed themselves from common sense. One of the things I love about what you're saying, and, you know, I think I've probably said this about 100 times, but community is such an important aspect of everything we do as human beings, just as people. And to be a good member of your community, you have to be, everybody has to take the role of sheepdog at some point. And that's the only way to be a participating good member of your community. And that's why I love everything you're saying, and it all rings true for us. I mean, there's a darker side to some of the things you're telling because of the stories and what they are. But at the end, it's all kind of uplifting in the sense that there are people out there doing this, making sure their communities are protected. Even ones, you're wearing a uniform, but even the ones who don't wear that uniform, you know, it's okay for all of us to be sheepdogs.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a huge sliding scale to how much people get involved in the community. Like, I have the training, I have the tools, I have, you know, the body armor, the gun, I have all that. I have a whole bunch of backup to deal with violent, aggressive offenders. But I don't know that violent offender's there until someone picks up the phone, right? And those people who even look out their window and say, hey, you know what, I don't recognize that kid, or I don't recognize this guy walking down my back alley. I'm going to phone the police and let them know.
Right. And then, of course, the rest of that is you can't be everywhere every time.
Absolutely. And those people that phone, those are sheepdogs also, right? They're just paying attention to what's around them.
Exactly. Looking out for their community.
That touches on something that, you know, we've talked a little bit about, the darkness that as a police officer you have to deal with and take home with you every day. But you did mention about showing up places and a member of a community going above and beyond. How often does that happen? Because I think we think, as preppers especially, we tend to focus on the really dark aspects and of possibilities and people in life. How often do you actually see that people do step up to the plate and put themselves in harm's way for fellow citizens?
You know what? Quite a bit, actually. It just depends on the call. But even if you look at, like, there's so many times there would be a bad traffic accident. 99% of the people are just rubbernecking, right? Driving by looking, ooh, that looks really bad. But then you still always get that one person out that either directs traffic or walks over and asks these people if they're okay. And even past that, you get them, they start first aid, they get on the phone, they relay calm, cool, collected information over. And, you know, this person's not fire, they're not EMS, they're not police, they're an accountant. And why did you, you know, I'll ask them, well, you know, why did you stop? And be like, well, why shouldn't I? That's the right thing to do. So you see a lot of that, really. Of course, the more dangerous the call is, the less participation you get from people around. And I think that's a smart move, right? If a car's on fire, that's a really good place for our firemen to come to and deal with, because that's their specialty. I'm about as useful in that call as a civilian is, right? Because it's like, well, I got a pocket knife. That's my firefighting tool, right? The gun really doesn't fight fires all that well. And vice versa. If there's a guy running through a mall and he's shooting people, well, the fireman he can try his best, but really that's our job all of a sudden, right?
Mm.
But as far as that civilian sheepdog goes, I personally, I see that quite a bit where people will step up. And it's even the smallest things, right? Like if someone is hurt, just going up there and saying, hey, you know what, relax. Paramedics are on the way. That human comfort is a huge deal, right? So just stopping and doing something, you're a sheepdog. By driving by and saying, "Oh, thank God that's not me," I think that you fall into that sheeple category right away.
Mm. The second question we had for you about your dedication that we brought up a little while ago is something everyone that takes on the role of sheepdog, whether within their own family or whether it's in a broader sense like yourself, into communities, you start the dedication with your wife. A member of our forum posed a question recently, speaking of firemen, he's a fireman, and his question was, is it fair to count on my wife if you are in fire rescue? She thinks I need to be home and with her, but I am needed to save lives. What advice would you give people that have taken on that sheepdog role, whether in their family or their communities, that are struggling with a spouse that doesn't necessarily understand, or maybe even the sheepdog that didn't fully explain himself or hasn't really communicated very well? Because I think that as sheepdogs, not to be sexist, but do predominantly tend to be men, and I think we are horrible communicators to start with, and I think that causes us some grief. But what advice would you give? And you've talked about having such a close relationship with your wife and talking things out, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. What advice would you give?
You know, and it really touches on what you said there. How much has he communicated to her, and how much does she truly understand what he does? Our mistake, generally, there's two-sided coins for what I see a lot of new guys, and I did it in the beginning until I had a more experienced officer sit me down and say, hey, if you want a healthy marriage, this is what you need to do. So the first side of that coin is that talking. Because with the work we do and what we see, whether it's fire or police, a lot of times we're like, I don't want to bring that home. I don't want to let my wife know about it. I'm going to protect her from it. And by not letting her know, and once again, this is Man Planet. We don't like to talk about how we feel.
Yeah.
But if you truly do not want to let her know how you feel, they're not going to understand that on Woman Planet, because the women work off of feelings. And women have a hard time if a man comes home and doesn't want to talk. They don't understand that, hey, we don't want to talk because we just dealt or saw something really crappy, and I don't want to put it on your shoulders. A lot of women will interpret the non-communication as if they did something wrong. So then it just snowballs from there, right? And from the sounds of it, with this guy's wife, she feels that he's missing out on a lot of things at home. But to be honest with you, those are the same things anyone would miss while they're going to work. You know, everyone has to work. If he's putting in 40 to 50 hours a week at his job, he's missing the same amount of time with his wife and his kids that he would being an accountant. It just simply, I think what happens is that he's not talking to her the right way. He may be telling her all the fun he had at the fire hall and everything, but he really needs to sit down and say, hey, you know what, I'm really quiet today. And firemen, they see some amazingly horrific things, right? So he'd be like, I just took this call where there's a 2-year-old baby that had a heart attack, and that's the way I am with my wife. Absolutely, right? Like I'll come home and she'll be like, what's wrong? And instead of the standard male reaction, nothing. I sit down and say, no, you know what, this is wrong. I went to a call where a 6-month-old baby was molested, right? And I tell her how I feel. I just spill my guts out. And for me, it's decompression. Women deal with the emotional side. You're not going to burden her with anything. And then she's going to be really understanding and healthy. The other side of the coin that I was talking about is being fire or EMS or police. When we're at work, we're always right. So I'll go into someone's domestic hell for 11 years, and I've never been introduced to it, and I have 5 minutes to deal with it. So I go there and I make a decision, and I'm right. I have to be. If I bring that home, my relationship's going to crumble. And that's a mistake of a lot of police officers, and that where they come home and they're like, I'm right at work, so I'm always right at home, right? Yeah. And you know what? We're not always right. We make horrible mistakes. I think in the fire and EMS world, it would be the same, because they have to be always right. You know, they pull up to that burning car, they know exactly what to do. Why? Because they're making the right decisions. And if he comes home with that, you know what, I'm right attitude, that's not going to fly very far either.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't imagine that would go over about like a lead balloon, I think is the expression.
Yeah, exactly.
What does the future hold for your writing career? What are we going to see out of you in the future?
Well, right now, my sort of adrenaline-filled, exciting stories are slowing down, or pretty well non-existent, because now I've moved from police to teacher. But with that, I'm working on a book presently about dealing with more decompression techniques, because being in a firearms unit, I have the opportunity now to interview officers after shoots and after critical incidences, and our department's really progressive at dealing with that stress. So I've had the opportunity to take a lot of courses, further the education that way, and so I'd like to write a book not only for law enforcement, but for everybody on how to deal with combat, because as an officer, we look at combat as me fighting with another human being or experience human violence. But if you look at, like, I have a lot of friends that are in the business world, and when I mentioned the word combat to them, one guy's his perception of combat was business meetings. And he's like, yeah, when I go to work, he goes, I go to combat too. And I'm like, well, really? Explain that. And he goes, I'm in a boardroom with a bunch of people that are all wanting to get their goal completed. And he goes, so it's combat there. And he gets stressed out, and he experiences a lot of the things that I do. So I think that'll be the future, is a book more about dealing with the stress and combat. When I go back to the street, of course, I'll still write about my experiences just to decompress me.
Well, that's awesome, John. I thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing with us and sharing with the listeners and with your readers what I'm sure is an extremely personal experience for you. That took a lot of courage, I think, to share all that and maybe even admit to a few things here and there.
Oh, absolutely. It was basically the best decompression I could do. And you know what? I really thank you guys for having me on your show. And thanks a lot for all the stuff that you guys put up on in the rabbit hole. It on my boring night shifts, it gives me something to read on the computer. It's good.
Well, awesome. Plug your website for us.
It's www.wolfandsheepdog.com, and through there they can link up and find me on Facebook. Link me up there. If they want an autographed copy, they have a link there. They can just send me an email, and I'll send them an autographed copy of the book. Fantastic. Thank you again, John.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for your time. Ciao.
And that wraps up episode 29. Thank you for joining us. If you liked the podcast, make sure to leave us a review in iTunes. It helps others find us. If you didn't, well, why don't you tell us about it using the feedback form? Seriously, the show is for you, the listener. Be sure to connect with us through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the Urban Survival Forum through the links on the top right-hand side of the site at www.intherabbithole.com. Also, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. By connecting with us, you'll receive updates about the site and notifications of new articles and podcast episodes. That's right, we're not just a podcast. Every week, articles are posted to the site, intherabbithole.com, that cover all manner of topics relating to surviving in an urban environment, whether in good times or in extreme circumstances. Show notes are posted with each episode, where we invite you to comment on the show, interact with us. From Houston, Texas, till next time, stay safe and sound.